Do you remember infomercials?
When you travel, is your shoulder strap too tight and annoying? Introducing the Titty Bear. That's Tiddy Bear.
Some people watching this video might be so young that they've never actually seen one. So let me explain. Infomercials were long-form ads on TV, designed to both entertain and sell. They gave inventors and marketers a stage to pitch gadgets, miracle cures, and can't-live-without-it solutions to everyday problems. These ads always had dramatic demonstrations, glowing testimonials, and most importantly, a toll-free number flashing at the bottom of the screen, followed by the classic pitch for 3 easy payments of $19.99 plus shipping and handling. Now, early in the mornings or sometimes midday, you could find advertisements for a product that would help you clean red wine out of a white carpet, or an advertisement for a device that would allow you to turn off the lights with just a clap of your hands. Or if you were interested in adding a little volume to your hair, you might be interested in this product called the Bump It.
Then bump it up with Bump Its and get that salon-style look, fast and easy. Go from flat to fabulous instantly. Imagine being able to create today's hottest hairstyles in seconds.
If any of those sounded interesting to you, you could just pick up the phone, dial the number, and place an order. So that pretty much summarizes daytime infomercials, but let's talk about how things were at night. Now, the reasons why somebody might be dialing that number at the bottom of the screen, yeah, they were pretty different. In those late night hours, you'd find things like Girls Gone Wild promos, where you could dial the number at the bottom of the screen to gain access to uncensored content. Then there were other naughty ads where you could pick up the phone and talk to hot local girls right now.
Call me, please.
And then, of course, there were the psychic hotlines, where you could pick up the phone and talk to a real live psychic about whatever was troubling you in life. And that brings me to today's video topic, one of the most famous TV psychics of them all, Miss Cleo.
There's a birthmark somewhere on his face, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the daddy.
Oh, yes.
She was stealing, you know that, right?
Oh, my God. Found that out a couple months ago.
Yeah, man. And you will be back in court in the next 21 days, won't you?
Exactly.
Yeah. You were feeling as if she was cheating on you, weren't you?
Yeah, I did.
That's what she was.
If you were watching TV at night in the late 90s or early 2000s, then you know exactly who Miss Cleo is. You cannot escape her commercials. They feature Miss Cleo sitting at a table with tarot cards laid out in front of her, speaking in a possibly fake Jamaican accent, prompting viewers to call in with her iconic catchphrase,
Call now. You the way. Call me now.
and for the price of $4.99 a minute, she'd tell you your future. Miss Cleo was definitely a pop culture icon. She was spoofed on TV shows like That's So Raven, Mad TV, and even The Chappelle Show. But she quickly went from being a star at the center of pop culture to being a key name in the center of a lawsuit. That's because Miss Cleo was the face of an infomercial empire known as the Psychic Readers Network, a business that would eventually find itself in the middle of a massive scandal and under federal investigation. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the rise and fall of Miss Cleo and discuss the mystery behind her true identity. Was she really a psychic? Was she a scammer? Or was she the scapegoat for the network she worked for? Hi, my name is Taylor, and welcome back to Taylor on TV. All right, so let's go all the way back to the beginning. Now, I'm going to start off by saying that there is a lot of unreliable information when it comes to the life of Miss Cleo, but what we do know is that she was born Ure Del Harris in Los Angeles, California on August 12th, 1962. After that, the details are a blur. Throughout her life, she used several different aliases. Some of the known ones include Ure Cleo Melly, Ray Del Harris, and Cleo Millie Paris Ure. All of them seem to be some sort of play on her actual name, but the reason why she used these aliases isn't exactly clear. As a child, she attended Ramona Convent Secondary School, a Catholic girls' boarding school in Alhambra, California. People magazine once reported that she had also studied at USC, but when a journalist followed up, the university found no record of her ever enrolling there. So most of what we know about her childhood comes secondhand from her friends who were interviewed for a 2022 HBO documentary called Call Me Miss Cleo. The documentary was supposed to capture the story of her life, focusing on her rise and fall as a TV psychic. I know we went over her real name being Ure Del Harris, For the remainder of this video, I might switch between Harris, Uray, Miss Cleo. I think I'm going to primarily call her Miss Cleo. Yeah, if I say Harris or if I say Uray, I'm talking about Miss Cleo. So according to her friends, Miss Cleo said she often felt like an outsider as a child. She felt awkward because she was really tall for her age, and she just felt like she didn't belong at school. Now, one thing I did notice in her yearbook photo, they had like nicknames for her, and one of them was Whitey. And I want to know, what do you mean by that? Why was she called Whitey? Another friend in the documentary brought up how Miss Cleo often thought that her mother sent her to Catholic school to keep her in line spiritually and sexually. Her friends also told some pretty dark stories from her childhood, like how she was abused by a family friend. It was never explicitly said, but heavily implied that this was sexual abuse. She also mentioned to her friends that she had considered suicide as early as the age of 7 years old. Now, it's important to note that all of these stories are coming from friends. In fact, there wasn't a single family member to come forward in this documentary to talk about Miss Cleo's life. And then it's also important to note that all of these friends seem to have known her later on in life or post-fame. There were no cousins, no family members, no childhood friends, no classmates, and it just makes me wonder, where is her family? So that question only gets more complicated the more and more you dig into her family history. Miss Cleo actually tells people that she was born in Jamaica and that her mother brought her to the United States and gave her away to a Caribbean couple. Now, with this Caribbean couple, she was raised alongside 10 other children. However, her birth certificate suggests that she was born in America and that her parents were from Texas and California. Now, if the story is actually true, that she was raised alongside 10 other kids, then where are these kids? Why hasn't anyone come forward to say, yeah, I grew up with Miss Cleo, or yeah, I knew Miss Cleo when I was a kid? So speaking on more family, it's also believed that Miss Cleo had a husband. And in one interview, she actually said that her sister-in-law was the one who suggested that she start working for the Psychic Readers Network, where she would eventually move on to become Miss Cleo. But if it was your sister-in-law that suggested that you work for the Psychic Readers Network, where is this sister-in-law now? And where is the spouse that you had at this time? Speaking of a spouse, it's also believed that Miss Cleo was married at the age of 19, and they had 2 children. She had a daughter when she was 19 and then another child in her late 20s. So if this is true, where are your children? So neither the marriage or the children have been confirmed, but you would think that if they were real, we would have found these people by now, or at least the grandchildren of Miss Cleo, if the grandchildren exist, that is. So I said all of that to say that the only people speaking on her life are friends. And I think it's very interesting, or at least I noticed, that all of these friends, let's just say none of them looked like her. So there's a lot of discourse online about this documentary, and a lot of people seem to think that they're using it as a cash grab. For example, this Tamron Hall interview. The woman being interviewed for the documentary doesn't have a single answer to what Tamron Hall is asking. It almost seems like she doesn't even know who Miss Cleo is. She just works for the company. Like, it's the oddest interview, and the comments are even agreeing with how I feel as well. Like, who is this? Like, you had nobody better to sit in this chair and answer the questions on behalf of Miss Cleo or about the documentary. In fact, a lot of people in this documentary have never even met Miss Cleo before. Several of these people just work for a psychic hotline, and yet they made it to a documentary about her life. And then you have Deborah Wilson and Raven Simone, who were only playing her on TV or spoofing her on TV. And yet they made the documentary. I don't see why I guess, I don't know, but there's a lot of commentary online about this documentary. A lot of people say that it just doesn't make sense. I was thinking for research for this video, the documentary would be all I needed. It was a weird documentary. You know how you leave a documentary and you kind of know everything you need to know? That was as clear as mud. Like, there's so many things that were just kind of like, well, maybe, or I don't know, I guess. Like, okay, so what's the point of this documentary if nobody has the answers? Like, what are we making this for? Eventually, in the documentary, we do meet some people who knew her prior to her fame, and they came from the Seattle art scene in the mid-1990s. In the documentary, there are people from the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Center who knew her personally, and at this point in her life, she was in her 30s, and she was going by the name Bray Paris. They also noted that at this time, she did not have a Jamaican accent. At the Performing Arts Center, she produced plays, and in 1996, she produced a play called For Women Only, where she played a Jamaican character named Cleo. Many of the people who worked with her in Seattle said this was the first appearance of the character that would eventually take over late-night TV. Her colleagues remembered her as ambitious but also unreliable. After producing a few plays, she abruptly left Seattle. So apparently she mismanaged the grants tied to the theater. She was supposed to pay the cast and crew money, but instead she took it and ran. Some of the cast and crew say they received letters from her with the amount that she owed them and she promised to pay them back. Other people heard that she ran off with the money because she had cancer. Later, she allegedly admitted that she ran off with the money because she was in an abusive relationship. No matter how you split it, nobody ever got any of that money. Nobody at the theater ever saw her again. That is until years later when they saw her on late night TV. The same character that once appeared in a small Seattle play had suddenly transformed into the face of a nationwide psychic empire. So after leaving Seattle, Ray, or Miss Cleo, moved to Florida, and from there she answered an ad looking for telephone operators. This decision would change her life forever.
Who talks to psychics?
I do.
I do, definitely.
Oh yeah, I call.
Why are so many choosing Psychic Readers Network?
The accuracy of their readings.
Their psychics really are the best.
The company was the Psychic Readers Network, or PRN for short. It was founded by Stephen Fetter and Peter Stoltz. Like a lot of the 1-900 hotlines at the time, the business model wasn't really about giving answers. It was about keeping callers on the line for as long as possible. The first few minutes were free, but operators were trained to use that time to collect names and addresses for mailing lists. By the time the conversation actually got going, the free minutes were over and the callers were paying $4.99 a minute. So the Psychic Readers Network was already a business before Miss Cleo ever became a thing. They had plenty of commercials on the air. They had different people doing testimonials, and once upon a time, they had a white woman playing the role that Miss Cleo later came to play. But the white woman wasn't convincing anybody to pick up the phone and dial. So while working for the call center, Miss Cleo would use a Jamaican accent and the name Cleo. Essentially, she was playing the character from her play in Seattle. Now, in a documentary called Hotline, which is available on Tubi if you want to watch it, Miss Cleo was on screen talking about how she would rush customers off the phone. She didn't want to scam people out of their money, so she would hurry them along before they could be charged for the call.
If someone called me on the line and I knew that they didn't have any money, I had no intention of keeping them on the line. And it would say, okay, baby, I got to go now. You're spending your money. You need to save that money. You see that bill that's sitting over there? You need to go deal with that. And that was more about me rather than them. Even though it was their pocketbook, it was, again, more about my karma. That's what got me into trouble. What helped me out was the fact that people kept dialing back and asking for my extension.
The higher ups came and listened to her phone call, I'm assuming because her calls were short, and they decided that they really liked her Jamaican accent and how she was interacting with the customers. And they wanted her to try to shoot a commercial for them. So Miss Cleo actually said that she was hesitant to film a commercial because she knew that this business did not take the card work seriously the way that she did, and she had a reputation to uphold.
When they approached me about being a spokesperson, my first initial response was, I have a reputation to maintain. I really can't. I don't want to. I don't think that you all take it seriously. Now, this is me being on the line, recognizing now that this is a business. And I thought, well, it would be nice to do a commercial where people actually can get some feedback. And I said, look, you can put a camera in front of me. I'm going to do what I do at home. I'm going to read my cards. You can't tell me how to read my cards. You can't tell me when to read my cards. You can't tell me what formation to use. I'm going to read my cards.
So the decision to film the commercial paid off. At least it did for PRN. When her first commercial aired, the network logged more calls the next day than ever before. From there, Harris was promoted from low-paid operator to the face of the entire operation. Between 1997 and 2002, Miss Cleo became inescapable. Her "call me now" catchphrase and exaggerated Jamaican accent dominated late-night TV. Her persona went far beyond the phones. Miss Cleo became a pop culture figure, spoofed on Mad TV, referenced in sitcoms, and even parodied by Ozzy Osbourne.
I'm Miss Cleo. Call me now for your free reading. The cards don't lie.
And the number one thing that people joked about was her accent. So by this point, it's safe to assume that the Jamaican accent was fake, considering that people in Seattle said she didn't talk with a Jamaican accent. And now that I'm older and I went back and watched some of the commercials, she slips in and out of that Jamaican accent a lot. And I never noticed it before, I guess because I was a kid at the time. So it's safe to assume that the accent was just a performance, but that performance tapped into something way bigger. Andrea Nevins, creative writer and scholar of Caribbean and African diaspora studies, has pointed out that Miss Cleo's character played into long-standing ideas of Blackness as strangeness. In other words, audiences were more likely to believe her mystical act because she was a tall Black woman putting on an exotic Caribbean persona. So I definitely can see where they're coming from with this because audiences are already primed to see Blackness as strangeness, especially when it comes to Caribbean identities. They kind of tie it to like magic or wisdom or like otherworldly power. Remember, the face of the network was actually a white woman before Miss Cleo, and the operation wasn't doing well at all. So that tells you everything that you need to know. Because this lady was essentially doing the same thing that Miss Cleo was doing. And this whole thing also reminds me of the magical Negro trope in movies and TV. So this is where a Black character, often with mystical knowledge or powers, steps into the life of a usually white main character to guide them, save them, or enrich them. So whenever I bring up this trope, the example that comes to my mind first is always Giselle from Jeepers Creepers. If you don't remember, she was the psychic who knew all the answers and even offered her own life to save the two white protagonists. So in the same sense, Miss Cleo was kind of playing that same role for the people calling in. She was warm, inviting, almost maternal, but she felt like somebody safe that you could turn to and ask them for answers. So there are also talks about the Miss Cleo character coming off as mammy-like.
She's sort of progeny of Mammy in some ways, and the Mammy figure who was seen as nurturing but other. There was a level of comfort that the owners of the psychic network needed customers to have. And the Mammy figure has historically, though problematically, been a figure that provides nurturing to the white community.
Either way you want to put it, the persona worked for the Psychic Readers Network because over the next 3 years, they made 6 million calls and raked in over $1 billion. Meanwhile, Miss Cleo said she wasn't making money like that, even though the company was making millions off her image. She was the face of the network, they had merch, and then people were primarily calling in because they wanted to speak to Miss Cleo. Now let's talk about some of the other people featured in the documentary, which were the people who worked for the Psychic Readers Network as psychics. So they admitted in the documentary that they weren't actually psychics and that they were actually sitting in call centers, or some of them worked from home, and they were using scripts and they were trained to stall customers for as long as possible. They would use lines like, "Hold on, it's coming to me," or "I'm starting to see something, give me a minute." But basically these were tactics to stall people in order to run up their bill even higher.
We were given instructions about what to do if people did ask for Miss Cleo. "Oh, hold on just a second, like let me go see if I can find her." Like, put down the phone and like walk around and be, oh, Miss Cleo, Miss Cleo. And then like you're supposed to do that for as long as you possibly could.
So all of the people working for the call center admitted that they did not have any psychic abilities, but Miss Cleo, on the other hand, never admitted that. In fact, she insists that she did have a gift.
I do many things, but I absolutely commune and chat with those on the other side. Some call them the dead, some call them spirits.
So the documentary never gave a solid answer for this question. Was she gifted or was she just acting? We still don't know, but some of the stories insisted that she did have some supernatural abilities. So there's this set designer from the Psychic Reader Network who remembered Miss Cleo telling him a story about an uncle that passed away.
She started telling me about my uncle that had passed away. I never mentioned my uncle. This is not even a story that I knew. I had to call my mother and said, Cleo said this and this. Does this make any sense? She goes, oh yeah.
One of her godsons told this story about how Miss Cleo saw one of his frat brothers and said that she's getting some kind of weird message about the left side of his body. She couldn't put her finger on it just then, but 2 weeks later, his frat brother actually had a stroke and was paralyzed on the entire left side of his body. So how do you explain these two stories if they are true? That sounds like supernatural ability to me. So at the end of the day, that really doesn't get cleared up. I do know in the documentary, one of her partners said that she did have like an altar when they lived together. And so if she had an altar in her home and she was practicing these things, I would think they were real gifts. Because at that point, who are you performing for when you're at home, right? I just feel like there's one of those things that you just never really know the truth to. But a lot of people believed that she was a fraud. And that kind of began the start of her downfall, but things really got worse when the network collapsed. By 2002, the Federal Trade Commission hit the Psychic Reader Network with charges of deceptive advertising and predatory billing. Claims against them included free readings that were never actually free, operators who weren't psychics at all but call center employees reading from scripts, and bills that ballooned into hundreds of dollars. Some customers swore they never even called the hotline, yet still got threatening collection letters. And I could see how that could happen because, if I were to call a hotline and they asked me for my address, I could just give them my neighbor's address and try to avoid that collection bill. And then I'm wondering, how did they verify credit card numbers over the phone like that? Like, could I not just make up some numbers for the call? Or how did that work? Let me know in the comments. According to the Federal Trade Commission, the operation had drained as much as $360 million from consumers. Miss Cleo was briefly named in this lawsuit because there were debt collection letters with her name signed at the bottom. She swore that these signatures were forged, and then her tax returns kind of proved that she wasn't in on this scam. She basically signed a horrible contract because at the height of PRN's success, they were making $24 million a month while she was only making $15 an hour. So with that signature being forged, it later came out that the company essentially owned her persona. So why they signed this document with her name, I'm not entirely sure, unless they were trying to pin it all on her, which is what it looked like. So I forgot to mention, back when they asked Miss Cleo to be the face of the company, she was originally going by just Cleo, like her play character. It was just Cleo. But then the company decided to add Miss to the beginning of it. And I'm wondering, by adding something to the character, did they have rights to it since they technically made up the name Miss Cleo? I'm not entirely sure, but that's what it sounds like to me. And then on the flip side, those letters were all just signed Cleo, not Miss Cleo, just Cleo. And I wonder if this was some kind of loophole they were trying to do to pin it on her, or to say oh, those letters were sent out, but we own Miss Cleo, not just Cleo. I'm not entirely sure, but everything just seems odd. But speaking of corporations owning identities, I want to talk about Jake from State Farm, because this reminds me a lot of Miss Cleo. So if you guys remember, the original Jake from State Farm was actually a white man. And I believe that this Jake was a real State Farm employee. In fact, they had a competition to see who would star in the commercial. So this story sounds a lot like Miss Cleo's story, considering they both worked for a company and then they ended up on the company's commercial. And now the whole world knows their name. Everybody knows Jake from State Farm. Now, a major difference between Jake from State Farm and Miss Cleo, they didn't continue to work with the employee. After the success of the commercial, they hired a professional actor named Kevin Miles to play Jake. So Jake was a real person. They took that person and made a whole new persona named Jake from State Farm. And I feel like they probably made him a black man, so it wasn't his likeness, or they weren't using his likeness. They were using the exact opposite. I feel like they should have did that with Miss Cleo. Like, get a real actress instead of using your employee as the face of the company. When everything hit the fan, she was blamed for everything because she was the face of the company. Meanwhile, Feder and Stoltz, the real architect culprits behind the Psychic Reader Network, settled in 2002. They agreed to forgive $500 million in uncollected bills, send back uncashed checks, and pay $5 million in fines. But they never admitted that they were guilty. And still to this day, people blame Miss Cleo for everything. It just basically made it seem like she was the one scamming everybody when really she was just working for this company. And back to Jake from State Farm, can you imagine if State Farm got caught up in a scandal and people started blaming Jake, the guy from the commercial? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Or like Progressive, if everybody started blaming Flo for everything that Progressive did wrong, like, that don't make no sense. Am I thinking of this correctly, or is that not the same thing? So after the lawsuit, Miss Cleo cut ties with PRN for good, but that wouldn't be the last time that we saw her on our TV screens. In 2014, General Mills brought her back as Miss Cleo for a cereal campaign. She even did voice work in Grand Theft Auto Vice City, playing a character that looked similar to herself. And allegedly, lawsuits followed both of these appearances when PRN swooped in claiming that they owned the Miss Cleo character. In her later years, she navigated away from the character of Miss Cleo and went back to being the private person that nobody really knew, Ray Harris. This is where the HBO Max documentary Call Me Miss Cleo picks up. So we actually learned a lot of things about her later life in this documentary. I didn't know that later, after all of this had happened, she was still doing private psychic readings. I thought that was interesting. Another thing that I never knew about Miss Cleo was that she was an activist. She worked with the youth and the LGBTQ plus community. In fact, she herself was a lesbian, and I never knew that. She actually came out in 2006, and she said that her godson coming out was the push that she needed to come out herself. With her godson, he was a part of a family called the Ruckers, and they were a key part of the documentary. This was as close to family as we got with Miss Cleo. After keeping to herself for a long period of time, the Ruckers actually went and kind of picked her up, and they had these Sunday barbecues every week. And that was kind of a tradition for them. And she was the focal point of that tradition. So in the documentary, we meet one of Miss Cleo's partners, and they considered this woman to be the love of Miss Cleo's life. Her name was Lou Ann LaBon, and she also came out pretty late in life as well. But eventually they ended up breaking up. They never really gave a real reason why they broke up. She pretty much just said that they grew apart, and then the next thing she knows, Miss Cleo asked to move out, or told her that she was moving out. Now, a little while after Miss Cleo moved out, she actually passed away from cancer. Her last Instagram post on June 13th, 2016 was a handwritten note. Taking a break from social media, I choose to focus on my spiritual and physical health. Peace. She captioned it with one last reminder to her followers. Don't forget to celebrate life now. Every moment is precious. I appreciate everyone's support and love. Just over a month later, on July 26, 2016, Ray Harris, the woman the world knew as Miss Cleo, died in hospice care in Palm Beach, Florida, after a battle with colon cancer. She was only 53 years old. Well, after watching the HBO documentary, I was inspired to make this video. I watched the documentary, and then, like everything else I watch, I go watch YouTubes or check out Reddit. And people were villainizing her. And I really couldn't understand why. I guess I can see why you would call her a scammer. Basically, from what she did in Seattle, I understand that scam aspect, but people are calling her a scammer based on the psychic reader network debacle. Like, they're saying that she's responsible for scamming all of those people out of their money. Like, I'll never understand why people are pinning that blame on her. The Psychic Readers Network existed long before Miss Cleo came on the scene, and they were making all these calls long before she was the face of the network. So I guess I could see you pinning that blame on her because she was encouraging people to call in, even though she knew it was fake. But to that point, there's actually a quote of her from the Hotline documentary saying that she did take issue with them telling people that they would be speaking to her, even though they wouldn't be. So she did have some issues with that wording. In fact, if you pay attention to some of the commercials, sometimes she says, "Call me now," and then other times she says, "Call now." I don't know. At the end of the day, I still see her as an employee, and being mad with her about what the company was doing, I still kind of equate that to you being mad at Jake from State Farm. Like, I don't know if that's a proper analogy, but that's just how I see it. Tell me in the comments if I'm wrong, but that's how I'm taking it. So in my mind, the only people who should be able to call her a scammer are the people who are working at that theater with her, because she literally robbed those people. She took that money and ran. But if you want to call her a scammer for the Psychic Reader Network, then you should also be calling those people who work for the call center scammers as well, because they were doing the same thing, but nobody's mad at them. So another thing, people are calling Miss Cleo fake because she does that Jamaican accent. But walk with me. I think she was using that accent or that character just to work in the call center. In fact, there are other people in these documentaries who say that they have different personas or different personalities just for the call center because it just works better.
If I pretended to be a woman, it did go better. Thank you for calling the network. This is Cassandra speaking. How may I help you?
I don't think she was ever intending for millions of people to see her speak with this Jamaican accent. It just happened. And so now the whole world knows her to have this Jamaican accent. So I think she just kind of keeps it up while she's in public. So like Larry the Cable Guy, that's not his real name. That's not his real voice. It's just a persona that he puts on. Same thing with Paris Hilton. She doesn't actually talk like that. She's not as dumb as she's playing in public. It's just a character. I think that's what Miss Cleo was kind of stuck in. The whole world knows her to have this Jamaican accent because those people put her on TV with the Jamaican accent. She didn't do that on her own. Like, okay, if this is how people know me, how weird would it be if I had a Brooklyn accent when you talk to me? And then another theory that I have is that she was just keeping her real personality for herself. The way that the world tore her apart, can you imagine if they knew the real her? Like, at least y'all can tear apart a character. You're not about to tear apart my real personality and my real name. I was going to get into if she's a real psychic or not, but I really don't know how I feel about that. Maybe she could see into the future. Maybe she couldn't. Either way, she definitely left her mark on the future because, I mean, here I am talking about her life all these years later. I just know that Miss Cleo is going to be a topic of discussion for years and years to come. And to make sure of that, I'm asking you to leave your thoughts and opinions about her in the comments down below. Also, tell me if you've ever dialed into the hotline. I am desperately looking for someone who has called that number or someone who has spoken to Miss Cleo directly. I am dying to hear how that went. All right, you guys, so that is the end of this video. As always, I really hope that I did this topic justice. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.